Everyone, thank you for joining the webinar this afternoon, where we're going to be focusing on talking about the alternative methods to resourcing your business outside of the traditional recruitment model. Most of our clients and many businesses we're talking to across all three of the companies that we operate are saving up to 70% on traditional UK employment costs. And we're going to be talking about the three specific models in outsourcing fractionals and the employee of record model that are challenging the way that we recruit traditionally in the UK. So you'll be hearing from all of us individually about those models later on in the session. There will be a Q&A part. So if you go to the very bottom right of your screen, you'll see a square of dots. If you click on there, you'll see the Q&A link to click on, and you can write the questions that you've got in there. We will go through those as best as we can towards the end of the session. Any questions we don't get to, we'll endeavour to answer and get them sent out to everyone that's on the call and also those that haven't been able to attend this afternoon. So without further ado, we'll get started. So introductions, who are we? So I'm Chris, the founder of the People Group, who we will be talking a lot more about the way that we operate with fractionals and freelancers later on in today's session. We've got Brett Hasselgrave, who is the founder of Outsourceable, predominantly focused on global outsourcing. And again, we'll hear in a lot more detail how Outsourceable can support businesses in the UK and beyond today. And Andy Browning, who is the founder of HotSourced, who has been fantastic at promoting our event today and will be focused on the employee of record and sourcing model, which we'll hear shortly about. So hiring in the UK, what's changed? Well, a lot's changed, and specifically around the costs that we're all faced with at the moment has been the biggest changes we've seen, specifically since the new government have come into play, but also more specifically since the budget was released earlier on this financial year. So what's changed specifically? Well, National Insurance has had a double whammy in both hits. So we've gone from a 13.8% to 15% contribution. And the threshold for where businesses need to start paying national insurance contribution has reduced to a lower figure. So we've gone from 10.5 grand prior to April to now £5,000. So overall, national insurance has become a really big expense for businesses that have currently got quite a large or small headcount in place, but also are looking, or were at least looking, to hire going into sort of the financial year of 25, 26 and beyond. Minimum wage, always a really topical point. We know it increases every year to obviously keep up with the rising cost of living. So we've gone from an £11.44 rate to now £12.21 an hour, which sounds like a small amount, but if you look at that on a salaries perspective, which is below, we've gone from just over 26,700 to now 28.5 grand a year. So that £2,000 a year is quite significant for small, medium, and even larger businesses with their headcounts that are obviously a lot more bloated and large. So really big costs everywhere with both of those changes, and it is making it employee hiring it really, really expensive in the UK overall. What's changing outside of the tangible stuff? So there's a lot of talk around the Employment Rights Bill at the moment. We won't hear how that's getting on until probably earlier on in 2026. But what we do know is trying to be passed is a lot of the day one rights that employees get when they are employed by businesses. So from a day one perspective, that will be looking like statutory sick pay, but also company sick pay will be a right from day one. You'll find it really, really difficult to remove an employee from your business if it's anything outside of performance related issues. And even then, you will need to demonstrate very, very clearly how you've supported, nurtured, trained, but also gone through the performance measure process within a 3, 4, 5, 6 month period with that employee. So not only are employees getting really expensive to house, they're also getting quite sticky in situations with employees as well. And we all know we've also had experience of people with high absenteeism very early on, and it's been relatively easy to remove them during that probationary period. That potentially is all going to change from next year. So this is becoming really, really topical for employing in the UK. And last but not least, retention rates are becoming a problem, as they always have been. So over the last 5 years, we've seen staff turnover rates going from a 26% rate to about 36%. So not only is it more expensive to find and source and recruit people, and they're getting more day one rights in terms of the intangible cost of businesses, but actually our people are leaving more frequently, which means we're going to have to start the recruitment process all over again and again. So that gives you some context around what we want to talk about today. So I'm going to hand over to Andy in a second. He's going to take us through our case study for today, which is Sarah, the Managing Director of Security Squared. And we wanted to bring a case study into play so we can keep this live through the whole presentation. And it gives something for us all to resonate with based on costs and struggles and some of the challenges that this business are facing, that we're probably all facing in the current landscape. So Andy, I'll hand over to you to take us through Sarah and Security Squared.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, hi all. Yeah, just want you to meet Sarah. Sarah's our, as Chris said, our case study for today to just make things really practical, tangible for you. She is the founder and managing director of Security Squared. Security Squared are a small business, 30-man team. They provide remote and on-site security for other businesses to secure their premises. They help with sort of an on-site team who do visits to venues, but also sort of a 24/7 online customer service team that have provide a helpline 24/7, and obviously they're a typical business that we've tried to model this on, so you can all resonate with kind of some of Sarah's problems. So where are they at business performance wise? Well, they're doing just under 1.5 million a year in revenue. Their costs are, for ease of simplicity of this case study, we've presumed her other costs are pretty negligible, and so her main costs are the annual cost of salaries, okay, which amount to, across our 30-man team, 1,277,000 a year. And with a revenue of just under 1.5 million, that leaves her with operating profit of 173,000 a year, which is a 12% margin, which is healthy-ish for a business in the security space. And they've recently started measuring customer NPS score because she's identified the NPS score is going to be really critical to improving to boost client retention and referrals moving forward. So at the moment, Sarah is really keen, like most of us, to grow her business. But like some of us as well, she's under a lot of pressure from investors to deliver on that. And as part of these kind of growth targets, she's set herself the ambitious target of growing revenue by 30% over the next 12 months. So getting from just under 1.5 million to 1.9. She's also looking at what sounds like a modest target of keeping her operating profit at 12%, but actually in the context of growing her revenue and also massively increasing costs, like Chris has just explained, that's actually going to be quite a tricky target to deliver on, to keep that operating profit at 12%. And then also she's realized, she's going to get more customers and revenue. She needs to be retaining customers more, and she needs to be getting more referrals. And that's why she's setting a target of growing that NPS score from 30% to 70%, which is quite a big jump. So some big targets. If we look to visualize this and actually resonate and show you guys kind of what her team structure looks like, we put together this organogram of her team, her 30-man team. And we've obviously put in some gross annual salaries because you can kind of see and resonate with what she's paying some of her staff. So across her 30-man team, her the gross total salaries come to 1,132,000. But the key cost here is the actual total cost of company after she's paid the national insurance and the pension contributions. That is 1,277,000, as I've already mentioned, and that's giving her that operating profit of 173,000. Now, this is 2024. Going into 2025, with the national insurance increases and pension contributions, the same team is now costing her 1,347,000 in total cost. That is a 70 grand increase every year without any extra resource or capacity in her team. So she's massively under the gun. Her operating profit has now decreased to 103,000, which is 8%, which is well below that healthy marker that she wanted to maintain. So she's got away and try and grow her business while starting on the back foot, like we all are, with these increasing costs. So those are the challenges she's facing. And if we scoot on through to the next challenges, we can really highlight these. So she's got these big targets, but she's got a very tight budget. She wants to grow her revenue to 1.9 million. She's identified that she needs 6 more staff in the team. The problem is she's only got 120 grand budget wise, and 6 staff in the UK would cost her over 200 grand more. So she can't quite make those numbers add up. Her margins have decreased because of those 70 grand increases. So to increase her profit, she would need to vastly increase her revenue because the margins have shrunk significantly. And in terms of her existing team, those technicians on the ground and the customer service agents, they're already at capacity. They're overloaded. And so if she's serious about getting that NPS score up, she doesn't need just better staff. She actually needs just more staff so they can actually have the time and capacity to deliver a better service. So that overstretched team is really significant. And then the final point here is around retention, which Chris has already mentioned is increasing for all of us. You know, she's really struggling to retain staff, especially those who are close to that minimum wage. And because of that high churn, there's not as much continuity in the service delivery. And that is one of the factors that's hitting their NPS score. So that's one of the other challenges that Sarah is facing.
Thanks, Andy. That's really useful. And we'll be linking back to the case study throughout the rest of today's session, just so we can really resonate with what it is like and the challenges being faced by UK businesses hiring at present and also looking to grow. So what are the alternatives and what we're going to be discussing today? So the first up will be the people group, which will be very focused on fractionals and freelancers, both in the UK and abroad, and how we can kind of utilize that model in our businesses. We've got outsourceable that will be looking at how we can outsource specifically customer service, tech support and back office teams globally to, again, unlock some real cost synergies in our businesses. And finally, hot sourced, which will be focused on employee of record, but also sourcing and hiring employees overseas by utilizing that EOL model, which is probably the latest and newest concept out of all three of these. So I'm going to hand over back to Andy again, who's going to take us through hot sourced and the services that they provide and the alternative to traditional hiring.
Hey guys. So as Chris mentioned, I'm a fan of hot sourced. We're a headhunter and an employer of record, and we are set up specifically to help startups and small businesses in the UK to hire overseas. So the recruitment service, the employer of record service, we cover South Africa and India at the moment as the countries, but obviously you could use the employer of record service to hire in any country. So all of this will be relevant for kind of any country you might be considering. Of course, the cost of hiring in different countries is going to vary based on the market rates in that country. So that'll be the only variable here. In terms of, some of you are going to be asking, what is an employer of record? Some of you will be more familiar with it, some of you won't. It's a relatively new term, new model. It's been around for maybe 8-9 years, and then massively exploded since COVID, when businesses realized they could, staff were relocating and actually they could hire overseas with the remote element working for them. What employer of record essentially employs your staff for you. So they take on the liability and administration of the employment of your staff. Things like payroll, HR, compliance with local employment law, and paying taxes to the local authorities. So they take on all that risk and liability and responsibility, and you get to focus on managing your staff day to day, providing them performance feedback, and I guess submitting payroll adjustments, not to, normally you would, if it was your direct employee, you'd submit it to your own payroll team, but in this case, you'd be submitting that to your EOR partner who run payroll for you. And what that does is it allows you to employ people full-time, permanently, without worrying about setting up and managing an entity in that country, and allows you just to focus on managing staff directly as if they were your own employees. So this is great when you're trying to hire in a country where you don't have an entity. So when is an employer of record the right fit for you and your business? Now, all of this is in the context of you hiring overseas in a country where you don't have an entity. If you had an entity, you obviously would just employ them directly. So you are employing staff to be your employees, but via a third party who deal with HR and escalated payroll, escalated issues and payroll. So the pros of that are you get high staff buy-in, right? You're going to get people who bought into the business, have a little bit more security because they're employed, more longevity, and they're going to understand your mission and vision and values. And that means you're going to get really good buy-in and loyalty, hopefully, which is going to be really important for a lot of critical roles that you've got in your business. Also with employees, you get a really tight feedback loop. So if you've got a customer service agent on the front line picking up issues, they can report those bugs directly to the product team and get issues resolved really fast, rather than it going through a third-party agency where things can get lost in translation. And also, if you're updating your procedures and processes regularly, a lot of startups that I've been a part of are evolving very quickly. And so there's a lot of process updates. And you want staff who are going to drive those process updates and change day to day if needed, how they're working to drive improvements, which again, if you're working with a third-party agency, can be a little bit tricky. But the great thing about the employer of record model is the flexibility. There's no minimum volume that you are required. If you have a process you're looking to outsource, like customer service, for instance, which we'll hear more about from Brett, you typically need sort of 3, 4, 5 people in that process before an outsourcing agency is going to be interested in outsourcing it for you. But with an employer of record, you can literally start with one employee and grow as and when you need and scale up. So it's really flexible, which is what a lot of small businesses really are looking for. And then in terms of comparing this against maybe hiring as a freelancer or contractor in another country, there's a misclassification risk. As when you were hiring a freelancer or contractor in the UK government has some pretty clear guidelines around what constitutes an employee versus not, and they'll come after you if you get that wrong, and they'll backlog taxes against you, and you can get in some hot water over it. But when you're hiring overseas, the person that you're employing in their country, their government will also have regulations that govern this, and so you can get stung by HMRC, but you could also get stung by their local government as well. You can come back and say, hey, look, actually, you're in trouble for this. We're going to backdate taxes that you owe on this person. So you need to be careful of that misclassification risk. Using an employer of record de-risks that significantly. So that's one of the major advantages as well when comparing against maybe hiring a freelancer or contractor overseas. The cons are recruitment. Most employer of records don't do the recruitment for you. Okay, so you will have to go out and find that great person. That's so critical to making this work. To get this working well for your business, you need to find great people who are going to make it a success. And the recruitment is one of the hardest parts. It's one of our great value propositions at Hot Source that we do the recruitment as well. So we'll actually provide you, we'll do all the screening assessment, and we'll provide you a short list of 4 to 5 great candidates that you can then go away and meet and make a decision on. And because we bundle the two services together, the recruitment and the employer of record, you get a really great service that's really seamless from start to finish in terms of onboarding staff. But that's not standard for employer of records. So that's a massive con. If you're working with a different employer of record, often they don't do that. And that's actually one of the hardest challenges to get and circumnavigate on your own. And then employer of record fees can get expensive as you scale. Employer of records charge typically per month per employee. So Hot Source charge £200 per month, but some of the bigger players like Deal or Remote.com, they charge between £400 and £600 per month per employee. So even though it can still be cheaper than hiring in the UK, as you get more employees in one country, that kind of fee builds and builds and grows. And normally around 20, 25 people, we see businesses say, actually, do you know what? It's worth us moving across to setting up our own entity now. But that's where the employer of record flexibility is great, because you can start with 1 or 2 employees, grow, and then you get to that point where you can make a decision to set up your own entity and move those employees across. So a con there is that those fees scale. And then supplier management. You need to be really careful about what EOR partner that you work with, because if you end up in a situation where there's a dispute with an employee or a grievance raised, if you've got a useless partner, that's really going to make your life hell. So you want to find the right employer of record model, right employer of record partner to help you deal with those situations really quickly and smoothly. So the use cases for businesses are, as I mentioned, if you've got over 20 employees in one country, you're probably going to consider setting up your own entity. And if you've got over 5 employees in a process, you might also consider using an outsourcing agency instead of actually employing your own staff. So tends to be lower volume. But for most SMEs, it's really applicable because not a lot of businesses have that kind of volume. And then in terms of the types of roles that this works for, because you've got staff employed in roles, you can use it for any critical role, right? Because they are staff that are employed for you. So it doesn't have to just be non-core roles like finance. It can be business critical operational roles, and it can be roles with varied responsibilities that are evolving and changing as the business grows. And obviously, where you have consistent full-time hours, this is a really good option. Okay. So if we look back at Sarah's business, I've highlighted some of the roles that I think are really suitable for the employer of record model for her to hire overseas: bookkeeper, executive assistant, sales assistant, operations associate, senior or the customer service agent roles. These are all full-time roles at the moment in Sarah's business. They're working hybrid or remotely already. And so the option of hiring overseas via an employer of record is really applicable for these roles. For this case study, I'm just going to focus on 3. First one being the operations associate. Chris, if you can flick over. Yeah, cool. So in the UK, you're probably spending about 32k on operations associate. Some of you be spending more. The total cost of that salary is 37.5 grand. Someone like India, you're going to find someone with 3-4 years experience working at a UK business like BT Openreach, Amazon, Revolut. You can employ someone for between 7 and 9 grand with a total cost, including employer record fees, of around 11 grand. So it's literally 28% of the cost of hiring someone in the UK. So you can literally hire 3 people for the cost of 1 employee in the UK. So it's a massive saving and a complete game changer for the business. Next role would be the sales assistant, which is Francois as an example. Again, a few years experience with some UK international businesses, maybe even some startup experience. Hiring in South Africa, a little bit more expensive, but really popular with our clients for more customer facing roles. Total cost for Francois would be 18 grand in this example. Okay, so again, 50% of the cost of the UK, which is a massive game changer. And then the final role, the bookkeeper, you're probably going to all-in costs are going to be around 13 grand if you're hiring somewhere in India, which is really great finance talent, versus around 40-ish K in the UK. So again, massive saving there. So that's how Sarah could be using the employer record model to hire overseas in her business. And if you've got any questions on the employer record model, please write them into the QA section and I'll get to them at the end, hopefully. But I'll hand over to Chris again now.
Thanks, Andy. It was really useful to hear more about hot source. That's our first alternative hiring method today. So I'm going to take you through the people group in terms of our second alternative hiring method. And we're focused more on the freelancers and fractional space. So who are we? So we're a group of 3 businesses. We've got a business in the UK, business in the US, and a business based in Asia. So we've kind of got a global footprint of all the talent pool resources that businesses are probably most used to using now coming outside of COVID and beyond. Those models are really providing sort of the tailored support that businesses need most in all of the areas they need quickly on either a set cost or pay-per-use model. Typically, we see virtual assistants being used more in the US and Asia, and I see virtual assistants quite loosely. I normally kind of specifically pull out sort of more operational professionals, executive assistants that kind of sit in that VA realm. But VAs are your Swiss Army knife. They are able to do and have done lots of different things for businesses before, albeit with corporate experience or even just looking beyond other areas of expertise. In the UK, we focus a little bit more on specialized support. So that's where we kind of really get involved in more senior finance roles, operational roles, marketing, HR, legal, and IT support. Because we find in the UK, certainly UK businesses are looking more for that niche, real specific level of support that maybe US businesses haven't. And actually, it's really interesting because the US market generally always requires a little bit less education than the UK market does. They've been using this model for a very long time, whereas here it still feels a little bit infant at times, and we really need to take on customers on that journey of how it can really add value to their businesses. I still say we're a staffing model. The staffing model is not new. It's been around for decades. I just think it's been flipped on its head now with the use of fractionals and freelancers. So it's kind of rethinking what staffing actually is these days. We know it's not a new concept, but traditionally it was really low quality, really low accountability, and the risk was pretty high to businesses. So we kind of took all of those learnings from our own experiences and kind of tried to make the group in a different way to put to bed all of those issues and kind of scares that we are traditionally used to with the staffing model, but using specifically freelancers and fractionals as our talent pool, as opposed to kind of short-term, permanent, part-time hires that the staffing model traditionally uses. So what makes the people group different? Well, the way that we source and hire is the number sort of one differential between any other agency or staffing model that are in similar spaces to us. So we spend on average about 12 hours per team member in terms of bringing them into our business. And what that looks like is a really vivid reference process, reference checking process, interviews, skill sets. And then we finalize that process with a culture index survey. And that basically allows us to map out the individual based on their personalities and behaviors. And it kind of produces a role profile for them. So we know who they work with really, really well and who they work with best. We also use that process as part of our client onboarding process too. So we will send all of our clients a culture index survey. So it maps out the role that you're really looking for in terms of the behaviors and personalities that you need in the business. We will then use those 2 job profiles and match them together. So the match generally at 99% of the time is really, really, really strong. Behaviors and personality is a lot more important, we find, than necessarily just focusing on experience and skill set. We're a fully managed service, so we're not just a case of going, hey, here's Sarah, congratulations, we'll speak to you in a year's time. We are there in the background throughout the whole process. So we are taking care of the contracts, the NDAs, the payment processing, managing and looking after our team and ensuring that they are getting the right level of upskilling and service, but also keeping a really strong communication channel with them as well, so they feel supported. And we do exactly the same with our clients. We'll check in within the first week, the first 30 days, and then we flick that to a quarterly check-in. Holiday cover, sickness cover, swap outs if necessary, all on our shoulders. So there really is nothing from a client perspective to do other than just make sure you've got the work kind of set out, ready for the relevant team member that's coming on board to work with your business. We are IR35 compliant, and I think this is maybe the probably biggest sticking point of fear that businesses have. So with IR35, there's kind of two types. You've got the traditional contracting model, which sits within IR35, which is a regulation the government brought in just around COVID. That means if you're a contractor for 6 or 9 or 12 months or beyond, you will pay NI and employee income tax on your earnings. And also the employee or the employer that's using you as a contractor has the same accountabilities with tax and NI as well. Outside of IR35, which is where we operate, that does not apply at all. However, there are lots of rules and regulations that we as a business have to abide by. So exclusivity to our business doesn't exist. Exclusivity to a client cannot exist. Making sure that clients are using our team coming into office or Monday to Friday and set days and set times per week mustn't exist also. So we have to make sure that our team, and we have to demonstrate this very clearly in our contracts and agreements, are not being used like a full-time employee. So that's for us to worry about. That's on our shoulders. We take care of all the regs and rules. So again, our clients do not need to worry about IR35. It clearly is just a case of you paying that one cost every single month and getting the highest quality support that you need. And the outcome, you've got a high-performing, flexible talent pool without any of the traditional headaches and rules and regs to worry about. So there's pros and cons, of course, to this model. So the pros being there's no training required. So your time commitment is minimized to the least it can be. All you need to worry about is giving the work and any nuances you need to train our team on in terms of how you do things in your business. There's a feedback loop that we keep really tight. So lots of our clients like to bring in our team within their own communication channels and email domains. We actually also centralize that with our account management team as well. So response times are rapid. We keep on top of things, and we just make sure that the level of quality, the postman has to come at the wrong time, and the level of quality stays consistent all the way through. It's a super flexible and agile model. So 30-day notice periods on whatever type of pricing model you're at, and there is instant return on investment coming into your business. It's a real great way to get a plug and play solution straight into the company that you need to work within. So really, really easy to get that level of experience into the business without having to hire and find people and have the cost as a recruiter to try and find them for you. Cons wise, they're not employed directly, so you don't have exclusivity, albeit we manage availability and exclusivity with our team very closely. So if you wanted to up your hours or decrease your hours of level of support, we always make sure there is a contingency process in order to do that. They're not exclusive to your business at all. But again, as I've said, we manage that pretty closely to ensure that you've got the cadence to make sure you can increase hours if you need to. Typical use cases, any back office roles are fantastic for this model. If you're trying to find part-time sourcing of roles, it's really challenging to find part-time resource out there at the moment, especially at high quality. This is a great alternative to finding part-time resource. Businesses that are wanting to maybe test a hire before they commit, it's a great try before you buy model. And businesses that just want to stay really lean, keep their headcount to a minimum, but have level of expertise and experience when they need it most. This is perfect for those businesses wanting to really stay lean and maintain profitability and obviously focus on growth when they need to. So when we speak to Sarah, we have a discovery call with her. We found out that overall, we know the expense of her team is incredibly expensive and it's rising year on year. We know the productivity levels of her team are declining. So she's worried about the growth targets that she's set and obviously our investors are pushing for, but she doesn't have any time to train, upskill and really find anyone because she's so focused on growth. We picked up the two of the roles that we would really add value to within Sarah's organization. And really those two would be the finance manager role and the executive assistant. Those two roles we are supporting most with in UK and US businesses. And those are the two that we could reduce costs for Sarah significantly with, but also help her source and find alternative ways of resourcing those two roles within her business to keep it really seamless. An example of a cost wise. So Typically, the EA is the most important and probably common role that we source for UK and US businesses. Typically in the UK, that's anywhere between 40 and 60 grand a year. National insurance, 5 to 8 grand a year on top of that. Pension contributions, 1,200 to 1,800. Then you've got your recruitment fees that could be anywhere from 8 to 12 grand at those salary levels. And then there's equipment, sick pay, holiday pay, and downtime costs, which contribute to another 5 grand on top. So that 40 to 60 is the gross rate. Everything else then has to follow as a layer on top of that. If you have someone in the UK from our UK business doing the EA role on a flexible model, you're paying 28 grand a year flat. That's it. Now that's the equivalent of 80 hours a month, which is the productivity level of a full-time employee. 80 hours a month in fractional and freelance world is a lot of hours. And that would give you a lot of time and a lot of resource within the business. At 28,000 with no hidden costs and nothing to be added to that, and no worries about rules and regulations. In comparison, that's $24,000 in the US, and in Asia, which is our business over there, that's a full-time model only, but that is the equivalent to about $39,000 of having a full-time resource. Now I'm going to hand over to Brett, who's going to take us through Outsourceable, which are focused on outsourcing as a model. So Brett, I will hand over to you.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. My name is Brett, and I'm the founder of a company called Outsourceable. So our aim is to make businesses lovable, scalable, and profitable, and that's through better, smarter outsourcing choices. So basically, we're a matchmaking services, so helping startups and SMEs outsource the right way. But don't worry, there's no swiping right or left required. We do all that work for you. So what is outsourcing? So outsourcing really is giving your team the room to do what they're actually great at. All too often, talented people get stuck in the admin and firefighting tasks instead of the work that they're actually hired to do. So handing off that time-draining task to the pros, so your core team can actually focus on what really moves the dial. So what do we do? So Outsourceable focuses on 3 core verticals: customer service, back office, and tech support. Each has its own complexity, which means each client needs a tailored approach. Our USP, we match you with best-in-class partners who specialize in exactly what you need. So customer service, that's your first line of support, handling the tricky stuff with the human touch. We keep customers happy and your brand lovable. Tech support, fast, reliable, and calm under pressure. They keep things running, and so you can be scalable. And back office, they take care of the boring admin grind, so your team can focus on actually what grows the business, and that's how you get more profitable. So let's bring this back. So what does this actually mean for the case study and Sarah's company, Security Squared? So for this presentation, we'll be focusing on the CX team, which consists of 5 frontline agents and 1 senior agent. So from our discovery calls with Sarah, 3 big blockers were evident. High staff costs and overheads, like hiring a team in the UK gets real expensive, like real fast. Salaries, NI, pensions, equipment, training, I mean, it all adds up, especially for smaller teams trying to grow like Sarah. Resource drain, we've all spoken about that. Running teams takes time, performance, rotas, sick days, training. Without the proper ops or HR leads, this becomes a massive distraction. CX rating, obviously, the customers. As you grow, CX often slips, coverage gets patchy, quality drops, and NPS score takes a massive hit. It's not from bad intentions or bad service, the teams are just overstretched. I mean, the bottom line is these aren't just ops issues, these are growth problems for Sarah. So if we just look at how she's got the team structured, what's really obvious is the £19,000 national insurance increase. Like without even sneezing, this has already taken Sarah over her CX budget and department. But with the increased demand, Sarah needs to add headcount to cope with the call volume. So after hearing Sarah's pain points, we started our search for a partner. So our partners, what makes us different? At Outsourceable, we've personally vetted every single partner. We've been on site, literally boots on the ground with all of them. We've met the teams, we've seen how they work from the ground up. Our aim is to ensure that best in class. But it's also not just about skills. We demand strong leadership, staff welfare programs are an absolute must, happy teams, solid ops, and good company culture and environment. Sarah has some pretty specific requirements, especially given the complexity of the security industry, and she needs a team to handle sensitive data, but fast-paced queries, and still feel human. We didn't just offer options. We worked with her to find the right partner fit, and so we could get her so that she could hit the ground running. And that's why we say we're not just a provider, we're your partner. So we worked closely with Sarah and narrowed it down to 2 solid options, one BPO in South Africa and another in Central America. Sarah chose South Africa. It had better time zones, which she thought gave her better handovers, and she also felt it gave her a lot more control. The sample calls sealed it. Clear communications, more empathy, and a real strong vibe. So we kicked it off fast. 4 weeks from hiring to go live. Escalations stayed within the UK for the more complex stuff, and the result, a smooth handover and an instant £63,000 saving from day one. But it's not just a static it's not just a static process. We're always looking for areas to improve. As Security Squared's CX inbound volume grew, the outsource team quickly stepped up. They were able to add more agents and give them more complex roles, so handling things like second line escalations as an example. That freed up the UK senior CX agent to move into a CX manager role, which was a great internal promotion. Meanwhile, the South African team grew to 6 agents plus a team lead who confidently took charge of most escalations. So the results, it wasn't just a cut-costing exercise. This actually drove tangible business results for Sarah. Response times dropped from 45 minutes to virtually real time. First contact resolution is over 85% consistently, and customer feedback is now reviewed weekly, not sporadically, pushing that all-important NPS score up. The outsourced team didn't just fit in, they actually raised the bar. So, like anything in life, there's pros and cons of everything. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. There's no magic wand. I wish there was. Outsourcing takes hard work, dedication, and commitment from both sides. Every industry has its good and bad. It's like choosing a restaurant. It might look fancy on the outside, but behind the scenes, it's all sticky floors, grumpy staff, and frozen lasagna. Chef Mike is at your service. Outsourcing is no different. When the partner's right, everything clicks, and that's where outsourceable comes in. So, that's the end of my presentation. I hope you enjoyed the content, and I'm happy to answer any questions that we see in the chat or anytime after. And thanks everyone for your time. Over to Andy.
So guys, bringing this all back to Sarah's business, Security Squared, she's obviously been doing her research into these 3 models and has found use cases in her business where she's decided to implement them. So she's outsourced her customer service agents. As Brett mentioned, she's been able to bring in South Africans costing significantly less, 14K all in. She's actually given her promotion to the customer service manager, who's now leading that team, who's outsourced. Also, she's used the employee of record to employ the sales assistant, the operations associate, and the bookkeeper moving forward, which has drastically reduced the cost of those 3 roles. And using the freelancer and fractional model that Chris told us about, she's replaced the finance manager with a fractional CFO who's got a lot more years of experience in driving business profitability and growth. So she now has that expertise in-house to be able to actually drive those performance improvements and hit target. She'd also replaced her full-time EA with a fractional freelancer executive assistant, and together her total cost to company has decreased by over 187 grand a year. So now her operating profit has jumped from 173 grand to 290. So her operating profit is now at 20%, which is just a significant improvement on where she was previously, and gives her way more budget, way more margin to actually drive those growth targets that she's outlaid for herself for the next 12 months. And if I was a competitor of Sarah's Security Squared now, I'd be pretty terrified, because she's now got such an advantage. She can undercut me on price. She can spend more on sales and marketing. She can spend more on delivering a better service than I can. And with more and more small and medium-sized businesses here in the UK taking up these new models, if you're the last person left with an all UK team, it might be really tough for you to compete based on the kind of increasing costs and the implications of that. So finally, we're on to our Q&A section. We had some questions submitted by individuals prior to the as part of the registration process. So one of those questions was, how do you measure success for fractional roles, and how do you decide if you need a fractional position visa full-time person in-house for the role? Chris, I think you're closer to this with the freelancers and fractionals that you work with. Maybe you can answer that question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think measure of success is really important, and we probably see this really probably getting wrong quite often with people we work with, and we try to manage expectations. I think when you're measuring success, you've just got to remember that fractionals and freelancers are not employees. So having performance reviews, 360 reviews, setting KPIs, you've got to be quite careful of really not doing that. So I would say from the offset, be really clear on what it is and what outcomes you're working towards with that level of fractional support coming in to supercharge that process. So really clear on what you're working towards, an objective, which means the fractional or the freelancers working on the objective, and they're very clear what that looks like, and the milestones and steps in order for you to get there as a business. So I think being clear on the offset is the most important thing, but just remembering not to manage it or manage these individuals like an employee is the most important, because they really aren't. How do you decide to use a freelancer or fractional instead of traditional role or full-time hire? It's down to two things. I think number one, cost is obviously probably the most important. I would say with fractional roles and freelancers, you get a higher level of skill set and experience as you would as in full-time hire. So you might be able to go at a higher level of experience and skill set using fractionals you would be as in full-time hire in-house, which means you might be able to get someone that's had really senior experience, has worked in some fantastic businesses within the same industry as yours, but at a fractional cost, as opposed to you've got a budget with a full-time hire that you may not be able to look at those levels of support because you just can't afford it from a full-time basis. So that always kind of dictates that decision first. And I'd say anything after that is, it could be that you just want to test out the role. It's such a good way of testing out a hire before you commit full-time. And if you think as well, next year, if the Employment Rights Bill changes, that commitment is huge. You are really locked in with that employee, whether the business likes it or not. So to test out before is a real positive. That's how I kind of phrase those two answers.
Yeah, okay. I think my experience of using fractionals in my business is been down to the volume of deeply complex problems. So where I'm using fractional, generally speaking, fractionals are, people with, over 10 years experience, deep experts in whatever, whether it be functional or industry. And so when you bring on a fractional versus in-house, is what is the volume of complex problems that need solving day to day? And if often that you can solve a complex problem, but then someone else who's more junior or mid-level, who isn't a full-time employee, can then go away and execute. That's often a really good combination to use really experienced fractional in combination with someone they work with internally in the business who goes away and executes. But as that volume of complexity grows, that's when the hours of that fractional person will start to increase. And of course, there's a formula where obviously fractional, you're paying a slight premium for the fractional element, and at some point it will just be more cost effective to have someone full time when you reach that kind of point in terms of the hours that you're paying for that fractional person versus employing them full time. So that would be my take, but Chris, you're obviously far more experienced with that than I am. Second question: what are the implications? What things do we need to think about when we hire remote non-UK contractors? Again, Chris, I think you've had quite a lot of experience with this. It's quite a broad question.
It's a very broad question. I guess really it goes back to the IR35 element, right? So I think that's one of the things we hear from clients, that they just have no understanding of what it is and they're quite worried by it. There's nothing to worry about. I would just say make sure you pick the right type of business if you go down the agency route that are supplying the resource, that if they're talking about it and you've got confidence they're managing it really well with rules and regs, you'll be fine. There are some horror stories out there where people are, getting people to sign exclusivity agreements with the teams they're using. They're getting sort of elements of treating them like full-time employees when fractionals and freelancers aren't. People have got into that market because they want a lot more flexibility. They want to work for themselves. They want to give their skills and experience to businesses that perhaps wouldn't have been able to afford them on a full-time basis, but absolutely can on a fractional basis. So just be really, really cautious of who you're using when you're having that level of support used. I think non-UK, UK or non-UK, it goes for the same. Yeah. I would also say with non-UK contractors, just be really cautious of the level of agreements, insurances and protections. No one talks about that enough, but things can go wrong. Data handling, data sensitivity, all of those things, just don't forget that are just as important, whether it's in the UK or outside. So yeah. If a company's giving a little bit sus and it's not looking like it's following rules and regs and insurances and protections, don't use them, because there is a risk associated with that. Those would be the two things I'd always call out.
What I would add to that is because obviously contracts is a very broad term. To Chris's point, if you're looking for exclusivity, if you're looking for someone full-time, consistent hours, then best practice in my view, I don't know if you'd agree with this, because you go down the employer of record route. That's where the employer of record is great. You get that employee who's exclusive to you, working full-time, consistent permanent hours for you, and an employer of record will help you manage that risk. There will be certain regulations that you need to follow. There's things like how much time that if that person comes and visits you in the UK, there's some guidelines provided by the UK government about what that number is. I think there's a 90-day threshold where they shouldn't be spending more than 90 days in the UK. If it goes over that, that's where your EOL will probably be advising you this is starting to look a little bit more risky, and you need to avoid that. So if you're going down the exclusive, you want an exclusive contractor working full time, that's where an employer of record is like a level up in terms of protection against that kind of misclassification risk from a compliance side of things. On the data side of stuff, it depends on what country you're hiring in. If they're in the European economic area, then generally the GDPR is covered, so you don't have to be too concerned about that. But there are some restricted countries like India, some other countries like that, where you do need to think a little bit more about GDPR. And there's, again, your employer of record agency should give you guidance on what you need to have in place to manage that with them. For us at HotSourced, we provide a transfer risk assessment and some other compliance documents that customers can fill in to make sure they are compliant. So we try and make that easy, and I'd expect your agency or employer of record partner to help you through that. The other elements, this which we haven't touched on, Chris, and maybe also Brett as well, is around just cultural fit as well. Maybe that's kind of one of the implications that we need to consider. Again, very dependent on the type of country. The way that we do our screening assessment is we generally try and find talent who've worked for UK or US businesses before, or or Canada or Australia or European country, some sort of Western business experience. I think if they've had that in their locker already for a couple of years, we see that talent slides much more seamlessly into businesses because they have experienced that Western work culture, standards, communication style. It really, really does help a lot. So we would actually advise businesses to try and vet for that in their own recruitment or when they're selecting freelancers. Time zone is something to be considered as well, of course. And I think generally speaking, my experience is businesses, countries that are part of the Commonwealth often also have very similar processes to the UK and also a bit of a better understanding culturally to the UK as well. So those would be my advice tips. I don't know if you guys want to add to that from a cultural standpoint.
No, that's pretty spot on.
Yeah, cool. Wicked. Thanks everyone for joining. Oh, Brett, you wanted to talk about the next.
I'm conscious we're running out of time, but it's just really a shameless plug for what we're hoping to see is going to be our webinar number 2. It will be focusing on literally what everybody's talking about or asking questions about at the moment, and that's AI. Is a robot going to be able to do my job this time next year? So again, we'll be looking at the 3 different models that we discussed today and how AI is affecting each of those industries. So yeah, we'll keep a lookout for the invites. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks everyone for attending this afternoon. And as we said earlier on in the session, we'll have the recording out. And if there's any questions at all in the meantime, please do reach out to us on LinkedIn, on Slack if you've got an Operations Nation part of the community, or obviously on email as well. And we look forward to speaking and seeing you all soon.